A very good day to you all. My name is Shaloam Mutetwa, and I'm here to present the paper with the title Role of the Activity Theory in Examining the Interaction between ICT and Education. I'm one of the authors behind this paper, and I am a master's student, a full-time master's student at the University of Cape Town. I'm in my second year and I'm doing my master's in information systems. The second author is Gwamaka Mwalemba, and he is a senior lecturer also at the University of Cape Town, and he's also a member of the Enterprise Systems for Education in Africa. So now I'm going to begin by going through the agenda of this presentation, where I'm here to set the screen of the paper, to introduce to you what the paper is about by giving you a background and also a motivation as well as a problem area for you, the audience, to get a bigger picture of what we'll be talking about. Then I'll move in to describe the research problem as well as the research objectives, and then later on explain the methodology of the paper, how we gathered data, how we collected the data, and then how we also analyzed it and came up with our conclusions and what it means for our study. So this paper focuses on the activity theory, which is a theoretical framework, and it has its roots in the psychology department. The theory draws largely upon the works of people such as Vygotsky and Leontief, and it's become such a popular tool in a lot of departments, in a lot of disciplines other than information systems, and it's owing to the fact that the theory is able to view a system, or it makes use of two perspectives. So it has a social perspective and a technical perspective, and the fact that you're able to view your system in a holistical manner has become the reason why it's so popular. So you have your subject, which is the person that you're looking at, the person that is being studied, or it might not be a person, it might be an actual machine or anything that you're looking at, and this subject makes use of mediating artifacts or tools that you use. The subject uses this to act upon an object to produce an outcome. So your outcome is the overall purpose of your activity. And the theory also states that you make use of rules which govern your community, so they also give you guidance in how you're going to be acting upon that object by using those tools. So, and then you also have your community, which is just a collection of people or participants who share the same object or motive. And then there's also division of labor, which states that it's a division of tasks, so it's just governance. Who's responsible for doing this? What is responsible? Who's supposed to do this? And the theory also has a lot of other principles which have been explained more in detail in the paper, like contradictions and tensions, internalization and externalization. And these principles are the ones which give the theory so much weight and which the richness comes from. So because of how dynamic the ICT discipline is, there are advancements in technologies which also give rise to introduction of new technologies and tools which are used in ICT in the industry, and this also affects the education aspect of it, because of now we're going to be looking at how ICT is being used to teach in schools, in higher education. So it can be any discipline, in economics, in engineering, but how is ICT being utilized in education, or in actually looking at what's being taught in the actual content of ICT. So for this reason, we're looking at the paper looks at past studies of how activity theory has been used to look at all these different dynamics in both ICT and education. So we're interested in the common part, the part which is shaded in the diagram, which is in front of you, and this allows us to come up with a a fourth generation activity theory in the analysis of the interaction between ICT and education, which is the main purpose of this paper. So this paper hopes to answer the research question which has been set as, how has the activity theory been used to analyze interventions that combine both ICT and education? And the main objective is to answer that research question by looking at past literature, or looking at past studies which also looked at the interaction between ICT and education. And the methodology is going to be explained more in detail in the next few slides. And another objective of this research is, by looking at the past studies, we're going to be able to identify research gaps in literature and how else, and then determine how else we can fill in those gaps and suggest potential future studies in the field. So the authors made use of a systematic literature review, which entailed the use of a set number of stages shown on the screen right now. And the first of those stages is defining the protocol, and where in this study, the authors decided to make use of the main research question, which was stated in the beginning of the presentation. And this research question was able to be used as it guided the selection of the papers from the criteria which was used to finding the relevant publications and determining the method of synthesis in terms of putting the information that we're going to be analyzing together. And then the second stage is searching the literature, where the authors they conducted a search in Web of Science and searched through a number of different IS journals with reference to the AIS top 8 journals. And then in addition to that, also ran the search terms through Google Scholar in order to complement our search, our initial search. And then in terms of selecting the papers, we had to specify an inclusion and exclusion criteria, and this this is unpacked more in the next slide here, where the first stage of just the search, we yielded a total of 85 papers, and then from then on we made use of an inclusion and exclusion criteria to select the papers from, because these 85 papers were just a mixed bag. So articles were chosen on titles, topics, abstracts, and keywords, and the researchers had to go through all of these papers by looking at the title and going through the abstracts and the keywords by looking for the relevant keywords. And in this case, the keywords were activity theory, ICT, technology, and education. So if a paper didn't have anything to do with the activity theory, it was going to be excluded, because our inclusion criteria was using papers using activity theory as a main framework, as its framework, and if they lied in both the education and technology disciplines. And then the exclusion criteria for us was set to any research still in progress, dissertations, as well as invitations and studies not in English. All of these papers were excluded, and after going through all of the 85 papers, we were left with 30 papers. And then from then on, we assessed the quality of these 30 papers by examining the articles in terms of scientific rigor, credibility, and reliability, because the main aim for this was to assess if the papers were going to be relevant for the analysis of our study, if they're going to allow us to answer the research question as stated in the beginning of this paper. And after an excruciating number of assessments, we were then left with 18 papers which we actually used in analyzing this paper. And then now I'm going to move on to, so the most important thing to take away from the analysis of this papers was how the different concepts that I mentioned at the beginning of the of the presentation, how these concepts are applied to different contexts. So in this table, I've just summarized 3 of the most common concepts that I was seeing in 18 of these papers, and my personal favorite is the first one, the contradictions and tensions. So this concept has been used in ICT to explore the dynamics, inefficiencies, and opportunities of change in a system. And authors have actually used this concept to understand, or to at least see the effects of introducing a digital tool in a course. It may be an English course or an economics course, and I've put the references up there. The second concept, networks of activities, was used to observe various connections and contradictions among activities, enabling change. So a very important thing to note is this concept of networks of activities has also been used to explain the presence or the possibility of having multiple activity systems in one big system. So a lot of authors have used this to explain usually the dynamics that are there between students and teachers in any discipline, and how students make use of different tools and technologies to maybe make their courses much easier to understand for students. So in that case, you'd have a lot of activity system. Maybe you have the activity system for the student when it comes to learning, and then the activity system for the lecturer when it comes to teaching, and vice versa. And then the last but not least, we've got unit of analysis, where an activity does not take place. It's something that's explained by the concept of unit of analysis. So it says an activity does not take place in isolation on other rather than actors' influence, and may have their related activities. So this unit of analysis has been the idea, and a good example of how it's been used was an author using theory to explore teaching programming online through a conferencing system. And so out of the 80 papers that were analyzed in this study, only this one study looked into a case where ICT itself was a subject. So in this paper, the authors were looking into how online learning platforms can be used to enhance the teaching of programming as a subject for undergraduates. And programming is a course which is typically taken in, it's taken in a lot of subjects, but in this case it was actually in ICT as one of an ICT course. And this was our major contribution in this paper, in that the theory was just used, it's mostly been used in other disciplines other than ICT. So it's been used in economics, it's been used in mathematics, but in ICT itself, it doesn't really focus on what's being taught in ICT. It focuses on the technologies that are being taught in other disciplines, but none of the papers actually, only one of the papers looked into use this it used this angle of actually looking into what's being taught in ICT. How can technology be used to enhance the teaching of what's being taught in ICT, not in a situation where ICT was being used as a supporting tool, or technologies were used to support the teaching of other disciplines. So this is actually an example, or this is a use case where you could actually use the theory in this day and age to actually to understand the courses being taught, the content in ICT, and actually tailor it towards that. An example, and this is just some of the future work that researchers can actually invest into. And considering how there's a huge demand of ICT skills now, and it's actually being needed, that it's a need that students actually have the skills that are needed in industry now. This is a very important thing that the activity theory be used to understand these dynamics in ICT. So the limitations of this paper only lie in the fact that maybe the authors actually realized that 18 papers might be too few papers to actually make these kind of conclusions. But the fact that it's only 18 papers brings more light to the fact that this theory has been underutilized in actually analyzing the interaction between ICT and education, because there were a lot of papers looking using the theory in ICT only, and there were a lot of papers which use the theory in looking at education individually. But when we put them together, we only came out with 18 papers, which highlights the gap that's already there. So in conclusion, the research question was stated as: how has the activity theory been used to analyze interventions that combine both ICT and education? And the authors managed to answer this research question by carrying out a systematic literature review of 18 papers that used activity theory in their studies in ICT education. And the analysis revealed that the theory has been used mostly to understand how technology is used to support teaching and learning across disciplines. But very few of these studies looked at how technology is implicated in the teaching and learning of ICT related subjects. And even in the types of the technologies that were used, most of these papers made use of generic tools such as PowerPoint slides and Google Forms, Adobe Reader, which are just generic technologies. But none of these studies actually paid attention to technologies which are related to ICT in itself. For example, SAP or Sage, which could actually be ground for future studies in the works. So thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk to you and being my audience today. And thank you so much for finding the time to go through the paper as well as this presentation. I'm going to leave this time to anyone with any questions. And yes, thank you so much.